Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me. I'm Jill Bloom, group publisher of Walls and Ceilings, and welcome to a special episode of If Walls Could Talk. It's always an honor to have with me our legal expert, Trent Cotney, partner with Adams and Reese. Trent, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Jill, it's great to be here.
Well, Trent, it's always great to catch up with you, and sounds like there's some big topics that are making your phone ring this week. As always, as you've always said, it's not what you read about, it's what making your phone ring. But the first thing you mentioned was marijuana in the workplace. What are the questions you've been receiving, and what does everybody need to know?
Yeah, so, these issues really started to come to the forefront, I'd say, in the last, 7, maybe 8 years, when a lot of states you started seeing switch from medicinal to recreational, or from nothing to medicinal. And as you started seeing these changes, employers in the construction industry have tried to figure out, how do I deal with this from a safety perspective, from a drug-free workplace perspective, from an employment perspective? How do I deal with it? Because, regardless of sub-labor or not, lack of skilled labor is still the biggest issue in construction.
Yeah.
So there's been a resurgence in these questions because there's a lot of states. Florida's a great example, where November it's on the ballot for recreational. All signs point to the fact that it will pass. And there are several other states that are in the same boat. When that happens, how do employers deal with this? And what I try to coach or talk to contractors about is that safety always trumps everything else. So the first thing that you want to do is make sure that your supervisory people, your project managers, your superintendents, your crew leaders, whoever's, running that job, that they can adequately identify the signs of impairment. And it would be the same as if they were drunk, or they had prescription painkillers, or illegal drugs, whatever it is. You want to make sure that it's a safe work environment, not only for themselves, but for the other employees that are there. So part of that is making sure they've got adequate training. They know how to deal with the issue, right? They know to pull the person aside, talk to them, notify management, always have 2 people issue any kind of, discipline, have a very strict policy that deals with that. Within your safety manual, have, these are the signs of impairment, have, pictorial guides as well, that kind of thing. And then the other thing I get asked about a lot is, how do I navigate this with my drug-free workplace requirements? If I go to test for marijuana, the tests aren't that great right now. And, regardless of what test you're using, you may pull up positive, and even though you might have, smoked days ago. So
sure.
There's an issue there, and contractors are trying to figure out, how do I deal with this and still have this policy in place? Some have revised their policy to only deal with marijuana for purposes of impairment. Others have done what I call a second chance agreement, which means basically if you pop once and you sign an agreement, you basically say, hey, here it is, you get a chance to do that. Again, the problem is that a lot of insurance companies dictate the policies for a drug-free workplace. So your workers' comp, insurance company is going to say, hey, here's what you need to have. If you do all this, I may give you a reduction in your premiums if it's a drug-free workplace and you're following these things. Well, the problem with that is it's very difficult in this environment where, at night, after hours, wherever, you can do these things legally, but they could still potentially be in your system. As you can tell, a lot of legal issues there, a lot of things to navigate, but this has sort of reared its head again because many states are now in that transition process during this election cycle.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables there for sure. And so, Trent, have you seen in other states where recreational is already legal, where they have gone to court, and how are judges ruling on this?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of states that, Massachusetts is one, and I believe Oregon is one. California, there are other states that have laws that favor employees that, are using marijuana. Now, again, safety trumps all. So if you've got someone that is high as a kite up on a roof, it doesn't matter, if they're a card carrying member or it's recreational or whatever, it doesn't matter, right? You can't do that. Just like I can't pop a gin and tonic on top of a roof either, right?
Right.
So, and trust me, there's been many times I've wanted to do that. So, at the end of the day, that is the key thing: is that safety trumps everything. So there are some state-friendly, laws out there for employees that cut against some of this stuff, that talk about hiring and firing, how you can't, refuse to hire someone solely because they're a user. There are other requirements with regard to drug testing. There's a variety of things like that. And I think what employers are having to do is figure out, how do I thread the needle here? How do I ensure it's a safe workplace, but still, maintain some kind of policy? And the reality is that many have turned only to testing if there appears to be impairment. Otherwise, there's not random test. So they're having to adjust and modify based on, the prevalence of marijuana usage.
Got it. Yep. It is something that is great to know. That's great advice, Trent, because everyone's going to be dealing with this probably in almost every state pretty soon. How many states are actually legal right now recreationally?
A lot. I don't remember the last count. It's
it's over half. I know Michigan is for sure.
I will say within the next 2 years, we will see, federal and state 100% legal. I just don't see it holding out any longer. And there's pros and cons to that,
Yeah.
But that's, I think, just going to be a reality. So
for sure. Well, let's talk about OSHA, because that was something else that's making your phone ring.
Yeah,
sounds like
absolutely.
some additional guidelines happening.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, we have to do a lot of fatality defense for contractors every year. It's never a pleasant thing. A lot of moving parts, everything from, active, police and sheriff's department investigations, to the press, to, dealing with your employees, to dealing with the next of kin. And along with that comes, the OSHA inspection. Historically, the compliance officers would not openly communicate back and forth with the next of kin. There may be some communication, but it wouldn't be, a constant transfer of information. Under this new guideline that has been passed, and it was passed recently, the COSHA, or the compliance officer, has a written checklist where they have to actively communicate the status of the inspection, the result and outcome of the inspection, and give a lot of information as the inspection is ongoing, right? And part of the issue here is that this may be bad for employers and contractors for a couple of reasons. One, regardless of whether workers' comp is there or not, there is almost always a personal injury lawyer that is lurking in the background. And generally, if you have workers' compensation, that would exempt you from any type of personal injury claim against an employer, unless there's some kind of gross negligence or something like that. But all that information that OSHA is giving the family immediately goes to that lawyer, where historically that wouldn't, they may be able to get bits and pieces after the inspection is concluded, but rarely would they get unfettered access like that. The next thing that is a potential issue is that the OSHA inspector themselves may be reluctant to issue less egregious citations, because they know they have to discuss those results with the family members. Meaning that if they start inspecting and they see that there really wasn't any malfeasance by the employer, and they may let them off, or it may just be, a correction here or there that has nothing to do with the fatality, they may be less inclined to do that if they know they have to discuss that result with the next of kin. So there are some concerns there from a employer contractor standpoint, as far as this type of communication, the checklist that must now be adhered to. But again, I guess it is what it is at this point. I don't really see this being an area that could necessarily be contested. It's more of just a operational guideline function that OSHA has published internally.
Yeah, it just feels like sometimes you might not get the full picture until you get all the information.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so how do you, conclusion, you can jump to a certain conclusion very quickly if you don't have all the information that you need.
Yeah, and that's it. You're getting status of the inspection. There's an open line of communication, and Obviously, don't misconstrue anything I'm saying. Our hearts always go out to any next of kin. This is not to minimize the fatality in any way, but from a risk mitigation and employer defense standpoint, I have concerns because, clearly I don't want this open communication with the next of kin to persuade or sway a compliance officer that otherwise would not be so because of the facts of the case. That, as well as, recognizing that most, next of kin have retained some kind of lawyer. So it's not as simple as conveying information.
Well, as always, Trent, thank you so much for all your insight. If anybody has any questions, how do they reach you?
Sure. They can hit me via email, trent.cotney@arlaw.com, or on social @TrentCotney.
Excellent. Well, as always, thank you for your time, Trent. If anybody has any questions for us, it is wconline.com or roofingcontractor.com. And while you're there, make sure you sign up for all our free content, especially sign up for our e-newsletters. There's many of them. Follow us on all our social media channels so you can stay up to date on all the great content we're putting out, especially our legal insight from our legal expert, Trent Cotney. But most importantly, as always, stay safe and healthy, and we can't wait to talk to you soon. Thanks again, Trent.
Thank you.